Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the 15th floor here at Columbia University in the School of International Affairs. My name is Alexander Cooley. I'm a professor and chair of the Political Science Department at Barnard College at Columbia. I'm also deputy director here at the Harriman Institute, responsible for social sciences programming. For those of you who don't know, the Harriman Institute at Columbia is the country's oldest research institute dedicated to the study of Russia and the former Soviet Union. We've had several name changes, originally the Russia Institute, and the Avril Harriman Institute. Finally, we just decided the Harriman Institute. Our mission is to foster a community of dialogue for experts, researchers, and policy officials who are engaged with Eurasia. We hold about 150 events a year, but it's safe to say that none are more pressing and timely than today's. It is my great pleasure and privilege to welcome Ambassador Lamberto Zannier. He is the Secretary General of the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, also known as the OSCE. The ambassador took up the post of OSCE Secretary General on the 1st of July 2011. He is an Italian career diplomat, having joined the Italian Foreign Ministry in 1978. From June 2008 to June 2011, he was UN Special Representative for Kosovo and the head of the United Nations Interim Administration Mission in Kosovo. From 2002 to 2006, he was director of the Conflict Prevention Center of the OSCE, and previous senior positions include permanent representative of Italy to the Executive Council of the Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons in The Hague, chairperson of the negotiations on the adaptation of the Treaty on Conventional Armed Forces in Europe, and head of Disarmament, Arms Control, and Cooperative Security at NATO from 1991 to 1997. In addition, the ambassador is also author of various articles and publications on political issues, arms control, peacekeeping, and security cooperation, and co-author of a book on the cooperative approach to security. We are currently in the midst of what has been described as the greatest security crisis facing Europe in the post-Cold War era, and the OSCE is at the heart of international efforts to stabilize the situation in Ukraine and find a regionally and internationally workable solution to the present crisis. Speaking on Ukraine between West and East, please join me in welcoming to Columbia Ambassador Lamberto Zannier.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you, Professor Cooley, for this opportunity to talk to you about some of the things we are doing now. We're engaged these days, being very intense here, consultations, all forms of consultations in the margins of the General Assembly. Tomorrow morning, in fact, we will have a ministerial meeting, a side event at the ministerial level, where we have about 30, 35 ministers discussing with us for a couple of hours the way forward and preparing to the discussion. Also, deliberations at the Ministerial Council of the OSCE will take place in Switzerland at the end of the year. For me, attending the opening week of the General Assembly is now a regular event. Last year, I was thinking on the way to here. I had a very long journey to New York to come to the General Assembly. I got up very early in the morning, and I was in a place called Yalta in Crimea. I traveled from there, went by car to Simferopol, took a plane to Kiev, another to Istanbul, and from there came to New York. A long trip. I was in Yalta for a conference of a series called the Yalta European Forum, where there was a debate, a very high-level debate on the strategic direction of Ukraine at that moment. The discussion at last year's session of the Yalta European Strategy event was particularly controversial. President Yanukovych was there. And in his presentation, he was showing a strong commitment to moving towards the European Union, where he was looking at the signing of the association agreement with the European Union at the Vilnius summit. But he was also pointing to some of the difficulties he was facing. Ukraine was facing serious financial problems. It needed refinancing. Negotiations with the European Union on refinancing were not too successful. It needed much more than what was on offer from the EU. He needed to conclude his deal with Russia on the gas price, and that negotiation was very difficult. I remember at that forum we had quite a discussion with the Lithuanian president, who was priding herself of paying the most expensive gas in Europe, gas price in Europe, but saying this is a policy decision we made, and we don't care how expensive the gas is, but we are very happy that we're part of the European Union, part of the family of Western nations. You should have the courage of to make the same choice. And Yanukovych was trying to say, yeah, but you are Lithuanian. Ukraine is much bigger. We need much more than you do, and this is for us an extremely difficult issue. So that already gave me a sense that something was brewing, that while it was clear that the stated goal was that of moving westwards for Ukraine, there was a need to remain connected with the Russian-centric set of institutional setup somehow. And what the Ukrainian leadership was asking me, and also the Ukraine, I forgot to mention, last year was the chair of the OSCE. So in fact I was working very closely with them step by step on a number of issues. It was a very successful chairmanship that concluded in Kiev with the ministerial in December, with a number of important decisions for the OSCE, but also with Maidan already going on. So we had many ministers there, but there was as much activity in the room where the ministerial took place as there was outside when many of the ministers and myself went out to talk to the people in the streets to try to understand what was happening there. So as I say, it was a good chairmanship. It was very much under the sign of the future direction of Ukraine. And the foreign minister asked me and encouraged me more than once in my discussions with the European Commission, the Commissioner Füle in particular in Brussels, to assure him of their willingness or their commitment to engage, but also to explain that they needed to have the space to continue their own engagement also with the neighboring countries, including Russia. And that's where they ran into trouble, because Füle was very firm in saying the DCFTA, the Deep and Comprehensive Free Trade Area of the European Union, is not compatible with the customs union of the Soviet Union, so Ukraine has to choose. And this choice was in the end the killer for Yanukovych himself, because he found himself at some point facing an offer from Russia that was difficult for him to refuse, but an offer that would have implied a delay in that strategic course that he had started, that was widely supported in the country. Also, this European strategy forum that I was attending was financed by one of the biggest oligarchs in Ukraine. And so, there was a strong also economic interest and a strong drive towards this movement, towards the European Union. So when Yanukovych suddenly announced that he couldn't follow the course he had set himself for the country and he needed to rethink, this created what we've all seen on the images on television, what we've seen, those of you who have been to Ukraine in that period happening in the streets. Ukraine, and I would like to make at this point a step backwards. I'd seen Ukraine and I met Ukrainian issues, Ukraine-related, a number of times in the different functions that I performed in the last 20 years or so. And one I remember still very vividly was the issue of the denuclearization of Ukraine. I was at the time in NATO, and at some point NATO was supporting through a program of assistance the programs of denuclearization in the former Soviet space. And one of the issues was return of strategic system, dismantlement of strategic systems, and the return, especially of the tactical nuclear weapons, to Russia. For dismantlement, that was the arrangement at the time. And this was involving, in particular, Ukraine and Kazakhstan. And at some point, this process came to a grinding halt. The Ukrainians felt that there were not enough guarantees provided to them for their own security. There had already been in the past a pretty acrimonious discussion on the conventional weapons, where we had a treaty, the CFE treaty that you mentioned. I chaired the adaptation of that in the end of the 90s. That treaty had been signed by the Soviet Union, and it defined a certain amount of conventional armaments for the Soviet Union. But by the time it got into force, the Soviet Union didn't exist anymore. And so we had to set up in NATO a working group discussing with the successor states of the Soviet Union the way and the way into which and the logic for them to redistribute the armaments across the countries. There was an interest in the West and in NATO countries trying to make sure that stability would be preserved, and that also required an equitable redistribution in a way of the equipment of the Red Army, let's put it this way, among the successor states. And Russia initially was saying, as you know, the main successor to the Soviet Union, will take care of that. We'll negotiate with the others. And the Ukrainians were the first to say, no, wait. We want an open discussion, and we want everybody to feel comfortable with that. And that took much longer in terms of negotiation. But then we got to an agreement, and that was solved. That it was the dynamics of the relationship between Ukraine and Russia in security terms had already become rather clear as dynamics that were potentially problematic over time. In the nuclear sphere, this was even more complicated. So in the end, we had, from NATO, we had to intervene with a number of demarches in Moscow, in Kiev. There was also a rather funny episode that I came across, because I was dealing with this with a senior diplomat, a Russian diplomat in Moscow, who was a person from the foreign ministry operating with the Ministry of Minatom, the Ministry of Atomic Affairs, and was dealing with issues related to the and I was conveying to him what the expectations were in NATO in terms of assurances, given an openness also to the Ukrainian inspectors, for them to monitor the destruction of those tactical nuclear weapons that were to return to Russia, so that they were assured that those weapons were not kept there in stock and potentially become a threat for Ukraine itself. At some point, we decided to also demarche the Ukrainians on this, and we sent some people to Kiev, but then we called in also the Ukrainian ambassador. This was, must have been mid-92 or something like that. And we looked around, and we saw that there was a Ukrainian chargé d'affaires accredited also to Brussels and to NATO in Paris. So we called him in. As I looked the name, I saw the name was the same name as the guy who was in Moscow, the same family name as the guy who was in Moscow. So I pointed this out to the Russian ambassador, who told me, yes, they're brothers. And so I thought, wow, we have discussed such a sensitive issue with two persons who haven't figured out whether they're Russians or Ukrainians. And this gave us also the sense of how complicated this whole issue would have been in handling. So this is a sort of just illustrative, if you want to, symbolically, of the kind of difficulties in the environment in which we were operating at the time. But anyhow, we managed to pull together that agreement, and the result was the Budapest Memorandum. A Budapest Memorandum where Russia and a number of other nuclear states, in return for the denuclearization of Ukraine, guaranteed the security and territorial integrity of Ukraine itself. Now, this memorandum, you will have heard it mentioned, it suddenly became famous in relation to Crimea, because that was one of the issues that the international community has been looked at as soon as Crimea got separated from Ukraine and annexed to Russia. back to December. In Kiev, I tried myself to understand a bit better the issues of Maidan. We had a problem, though, in OSCE terms, because what we found was that the Ukrainians were very reticent in terms of, engagement of an international organization in something that they regard in an internal affair. And so for a couple of months, there was, in January, the handover of the chairmanship to Switzerland, which is now still the chair of the OSCE. And at that point, we started developing a bit more of an action plan. We need to do something. This can't be left just festering along, and we need to act on this. We saw that there was a need for a political political steps. We tried to engage with the then leadership, but we got in the beginning a very firm pushback. So the same attitude that we're seeing in December was continuing. But what we were seeing on the ground is that there was a progressive radicalization of the movement on the streets. So Maidan and the right sector was starting to emerge and to be seen and to contaminate somewhat politically this. And this was the beginning of one of the elements, and I think one of the elements that have strongly influenced also the subsequent phases of this crisis, which is the strong ideological contents of it. We started hearing from Moscow accusations that Ukraine was becoming, or that the Maidan movement was becoming a fascist movement, and therefore the requests that were putting forward to the leadership were requests politically motivated, and there was a lack of democracy in this process and all this. When the situation degenerated, and following the interventions also of high-level political figures from the West, and Yanukovych struck a deal, but then realized that this wasn't working and then decided to leave the country. Then the situation really changed dramatically. I remember we went immediately, started moving to try to create something which we were calling a contact group. At that time, Burkhalter, the Swiss president, was here in New York at the Security Council, and he announced the idea of creation of a contact group. I was traveling across Europe. I remember on the same day I had breakfast in Moscow, lunch in Berlin, and dinner in London, and consultations all along as I was going. And at the dinner I gave an interview to the BBC, I remember, on trying to explain what was happening. And we really needed to create a process that engaged the key actors that could help de-escalate the crisis that we started developing. What surprised all of us, including the Ukrainians, I suspect, was Crimea.
Yeah.
This happened overnight. We were not, also a consideration there, the OSCE in the 90s had an office in Simferopol, had an office in Crimea. We had seen a number of problems there. We had seen issues of the Tatar community, of course, of the minority issues, but also complex relationships, the Russian naval base in Sevastopol, and a complex relationship between, let's say, the ethnic Russia and the ethnic Ukrainian parts of the community there. So we felt there was a need to have an international presence, to monitor, to assist, and to see whether... And it was the Ukrainians that forced us, still in '99, so quite some time ago, they forced us to close down, saying, no, there isn't a serious problem, you can monitor things from Kiev, you keep an office in Kiev, etc. So when this happened, we didn't have a terminal there that would allow us even to try to pick signals of what might have happened. And so we got all taken by surprise. So Crimea determined the acceleration of the process immediately. Crimea was also a very atypical crisis. These green men, as they were defined on television, appeared out of nowhere. with masks. Nobody could understand who they were exactly, whether they were local separatists, whether they were coming from outside, who had given them weapons. But then, obviously, there were elements of Russian army that were visible through the media. As I say, we didn't have people there. We tried to send people there. We sent a joint mission with the UN. The UN appointed as envoy temporarily the UN envoy to the Middle East, Robert Serri, who joined a Swiss ambassador, envoy of the chairmanship, and the team of our people and our representative of the freedom of the media. They went to Simferopol and tried to talk to the local self-proclaimed leaders, but they were attacked by the crowd. They had to escape in a hotel. It was pretty dramatic, and at some point we feared we might even have problem extracting them. Finally we made it. But it was a very dramatic moment, and a moment when we realized it was very difficult to find a tool for the international community to intervene in a crisis of that situation. Since then, the OSCE has focused in a number of directions. The political process being the main one. What we did, we consolidated this idea of a contact group. Contact group that has been a kind of a shifting model. There hasn't been really a fixed pattern. We had at some point a Geneva configuration where a number of agreements were reached there, and this was already early on at the time, still at the time when Yanukovych was still around. The latest, we're seeing the Normandy configuration. And what we have now in these days is perhaps a more practical and more relevant tool, which is a contact group that involves the OSCE, of course, Russia, Ukraine, but also representatives of the separatists in eastern Ukraine, because in the meantime we have the whole eastern Ukraine development. But there is a continuity, so in this process, where you have consultations in general in Vienna, where you have a smaller core group, where you have a number of bilateral channels of contact. The most visible is the Merkel-Putin, how can I say, dialogue or channel of communication that has, I think, has served as very useful purpose in a number of occasions. But all of this in an atmosphere that has really turned into a very difficult environment for us to operate. For a brief period, I served in the CSC in the 80s. This was in 86, 87, so during the Cold War, when we had NATO, the Warsaw Pact, the neutral and non-aligned, and where the atmospherics and the environment of the discussion was extremely confrontational, even though we were starting to make headway in certain areas, arms control, etc. Was the end, if you want, of the Cold War phase, and that's when things started moving. But still, it was very confrontational. I now found the same atmosphere in the organization now. The tones of the discussion, the difficulty in passing the messages, the lack of understanding or willingness even to talk to each other, I think is one of the data that we see, and this is creating an overall environment within which is particularly difficult to operate. In any case, what we managed to achieve, the OSCE, and why the OSCE, you would say, why not others? In fact, it was the European Union that tried to engage immediately back in March. Ashton, Füle, they both traveled a number of times to Kiev. They engaged with the Russians, and they tried to play a mediating role, having had also the role in the preparation of Vilnius, etc. But then it became clear that the EU was, in a way, one side of the whole issue. Yes. So they really couldn't play that sort of central and neutral role that was requested in a situation of this kind. The OSCE being inclusive, the OSCE includes Ukraine, obviously, it includes Russia, it includes the United States, the European Union, Turkey, and a number of others. So everybody is around the table, And we can, as we speak, one of the difficulties I have in speaking about Ukraine is that when I speak, I should be in line with what the Russians think and what the Americans or the Europeans think, which is extremely difficult. So I try to be personal in a way and a little bit detached from what I've seen. But one of the characteristics of this conflict is the very different narratives about it. As I said, the ideology matters a lot. The way the Ukrainians now in Kiev see Russia and the way Russia sees developments in Kiev is already a major part of the problem. The way media in Russia characterize events, for instance, now in eastern Ukraine, and the way these are described in the West. You watch the two televisions, you think they're talking about different things, because the stories are so different, and even facts are given in a very different way, are presented in a very different way. The latest today, there is talk about mass graves that in the Donetsk area, and it's a tragedy. Lots of people lost their lives, and we found evidence through our monitors on the ground of lots of casualties also among the civilian population. But I asked my people, what are these mass graves? And they went there and they said, yeah, we found 2 places where there are 2 bodies in each. And it's tragic. It's civilians, I think it's women, the children possibly, but it's 4. So hardly a mass event. Certainly something that is totally deplorable and tragic. But these things shouldn't be over politicized. But that's what's happening, and creating more in a way drama around the whole thing. We need to de-escalate, and so one of the things we need to do is really to work against attempts, in fact, to dramatize and to create a more complicated environment for us to operate in. The fact that we are inclusive allowed us to start having a debate on what can we do to intervene on the ground. So one thing is the political process. There, I have to say that the Swiss chairmanship in particular played a huge role. As you know, the tradition of Swiss neutrality, the president himself engaged personally in this. He invested a lot of capital in this process and positioned the OSCE, I would say, as well as he could for it to play a relevant role in trying to de-escalate the conflict. One of the things we saw immediately is that we needed to have people on the ground. In Crimea, it was impossible. We tried. We had no access. So Crimea is somehow sealed off. And we still have a problem in dealing with the Crimea issue. It is considered to be a violation to basic principles of the OSCE. The OSCE and the Charter of the OSCE, what we call the Helsinki Final Act, states that inviolability of borders and territorial integrity of states are key principles that govern relations among countries. So we saw a process that led to the violation of these principles, and therefore there is a widespread condemnation of what happened. But that's where we are, and we couldn't find a space for any, how can I say, concrete initiatives in this sense. We're trying now to send there our High Commissioner on National Minorities to work with the Tatar community, because we are worried at words we are getting of, especially from those Tatars who cannot return to Crimea, and they say that they are now being discriminated there, and then we would like to have a better understanding of what is going on. But in eastern Ukraine, we found a different environment. We found the possibility to engage. So we sent monitors. Initially, we sent military inspectors requested by Ukraine. So a number of countries. We have a document in the OSCE. We have a number of documents in the OSCE in what we call the political military sphere, transparency in military activities, exchange of information, military matters, visits to military establishment, etc. So we sent military people to see what was happening, because we saw that the same armed militias that we had seen in Crimea were now appearing in the east. And there was a beginning of fighting that we were witnessing. They were attacking police stations. They were taking over buildings. So the Ukrainians requested this, and groups went there. One of those groups was caught by one of these separate groups, and they were taken and kept there for a week. That was quite an issue for us to free them. We had to negotiate. It took us day and night for a full week. We, however, managed to agree, and that was the next step and another success of the Swiss chairmanship, agree on the principle that we should set up a monitoring operation, an operation with a broad mandate that would put then people on the ground, people who could observe what was going on. However, also that was, there was a compromise there, because the Russians were saying the real problems are not really in the east, they're in the west, where Russian-speaking communities are being discriminated, so we want a good presence there. So we agreed to set up this monitoring operation, but we agreed on a list of 10 locations where the monitors would be based and from which they would be operating, spread all over Ukraine, only 2 of them being in the east, Lugansk and Donetsk, and all others covering the rest of the country, from Lviv to Ivano-Frankivsk, Odessa, etc. And this is obviously, in a moment like this, where we need to be very present in the east, in a way limiting the effectiveness, or limiting the effectiveness, or at least limiting what we would like to do, which is to invest a lot in the monitoring of events in the east. Our people, however, deployed. We started engaging and linking up also with the leaders of these separatist groups, all of them self-proclaimed leaders. They organized referenda. These referenda were not recognized by us. The Ukrainians told us they are not in line with the Ukrainian constitution, so we couldn't recognize them, we didn't observe them. But they created de facto situations similarly to what had happened in Crimea, and they strengthened in a way this drive towards greater autonomy, if not separation of the East. And what we saw also in talking to the people in the street, having monitors there, also allowed us to have a sense of how the civil society was reacting to these events. We had the feeling that at the beginning there was really a gulf between a relatively small group of separatists, the one that had taken control of the police stations and the buildings, etc., and a large part of the population which didn't really take sides. These elements of, in some cases, rather obvious pro-Russian movements were not, or didn't seem to be widespread in the population, even though there were marches and there were demonstrations and counter-demonstrations, so there was progressively a polarization, but which at the beginning was not as strong, not as radical as we have seen it then develop over time. And one of the elements that appeared to be new was in fact the Russian flags. I was, that's another flashback, I was in Kiev in 2004 at the time of Maidan. And I remember the time walking down Maidan and talking to the people, and I remember watching the demonstrations of Yanukovych with the opposition, and people coming from Donetsk and from Crimea with the blue flags of the Party of Regions, but not a single Russian flag. So there was no separatism at the time, but there were the contradictions that were coming from inside the country, and that's certainly one consideration we can make in terms also of responsibility of the leaders of Ukraine for what has happened. A country that hasn't really gone through any serious reform of its social, economic, administrative system over the last 25 years. Some of the monitors, as you may be aware, that at some point we had also the monitors that were taken kidnapped and taken by some of these separatists. And we had maybe 10 of them in 2 different locations for a month. And that was quite a nightmare for all of us, because we weren't sure what was going to happen. And when we managed to free them, I received them all one by one in Vienna as they were coming back, and I had a chat with them. And I was asking them also, what was their impression of, these areas. They were talking also with the people who had taken them. And one of them, coming from a country that had been part of the Soviet Union in the past, told me, what I found there is a piece of Soviet Union that has remained as it was. It didn't seem to have changed over time. The way people live is the same. And nothing has really been done to improve the conditions of life. These people have been, in a way, used. This was, it was the richest part of Ukraine, in a way, the most industrialized. And they simply got on with their lives, but nothing really changed around them. The border with Russia is a little bit more than a notional border. That's something we started looking into now because it's so important. And there are border crossing points, but for the rest, there are just markings, and for the rest, the border is open. And so, Russia, Ukraine, people were moving around, families were, the people I mentioned earlier were partly here, partly there. So this sense of separation was not so strong at that point. And so Russia, Ukraine was roughly, obviously this has become part of the problem that we're dealing with today. Because at this point, what we see now, a few months after the beginning of the crisis, is that many people have left. Those who felt stronger connections to Russia went to Russia. There is a large number of refugees. I visited myself a camp in Rostov. But others went westwards. And I visited a camp of IDPs in Kiev. And I heard stories, symmetrically dramatic, and I realized the difficulties now in reconciling. This is going to be the big problem the international community will face if we manage, as I hope, to find a way to solve this. We seem to be on that path at this moment. But that's going to be a difficult job that will keep us busy for a long time. So where we are now, I don't want to be too long, so we can also have a bit of a discussion. In terms of the OSCE, we have applied a very large number of tools. We have the monitors. We are stepping up the number of the monitors. We're trying to recruit more. To monitor the ceasefire that has been brokered, that has been agreed, the Minsk agreements, you may have heard about that. This contact group that has been established now with the participation also of the Russians. They've come up with a plan that we are fleshing out in the details, so it's not yet all clear, but at least there are a number of things, the most important of which is ceasefire, moving back heavy weapons, and international monitoring, and the return of prisoners, so exchange of prisoners on the sides. We will need investigation over time on the violations and all that. But then the other steps, the future status of the East, the constitutional reform, but some of the separatist leaders seem not so ready to engage with Kiev on this, and they say we had referenda, it's a matter of implementing what we decided, which is going to be obviously a big problem. For us, also our role in future. I'm now trying to put our monitors back. They went back to Donetsk. They are not yet in Lugansk, but we're trying to go back to Lugansk. We will focus on the ceasefire. I would like to monitor the borders to understand what is happening there. We couldn't do it during the conflict because simply we didn't have access. We have a civilian operation, and it would have been too dangerous. We would have had our people hurt. Only a couple of weeks ago, we had one of our cars hit with 4 people inside, hit by mortars. Shots, and destroyed. Luckily, it heavy armored car, so it resisted and they weren't hurt. But they stayed in the car for some hours, and it was not a very pleasant situation. So security for us is important. We are basically running a peacekeeping operation with civilians. In fact, we are now hiring civilians because there is no agreement. I'm arguing actually that we should have peacekeepers. And in theory, we have documents that would authorize us to put in place a peacekeeping operation, but we don't find consensus in the membership to deploy military people on the ground. And so we have to keep going with civilians, with obvious limitations on how much we can do. We have opened also a mission in Russia, and we have monitors at 2 border crossing points on the Russian side, in areas where the corresponding border crossing points on the Ukrainian sides are not controlled by the Ukrainians anymore. They're controlled by the separatist forces. And so at least on the Ukrainian side, on the Russian side, we see what is going across. But then it's a very limited mandate because we can only be there at those 2 points. And as I said, the border is extremely long and extremely easy to cross, so we can't see what is happening in other areas, and the Russians wouldn't allow us to patrol the border. So this is something that we will have to continue discussing. Actually, there is a renewal of this the mandate for this operation coming up, and I suspect it will be a difficult discussion. We are acquiring drones, unmanned area vehicles, UAVs, to strengthen the ability to monitor the situation also through the use of these unarmed technical means. At the same time, we are working in various areas, one of which being supporting a national dialogue in Ukraine. This is something that is very important because in Ukraine there is work ongoing on reforming the constitution. Decentralization will be an important thing. There are strong requests for decentralization from in a number of regions, but obviously in the east. So that will be something for which a kind of a national dialogue through roundtables, through public events will be important and will channel in a way the debate from an open confrontation with weapons on the ground into a political process, which is what we would like to see over time. Elections are very important. We had for the presidential elections we had the largest ever election observation operation in the OSCE with 1,000 people in Ukraine. We are preparing a very large one now for the parliamentary elections in November. Then there will be local elections in the east, and we will have to see also how those play out. So this is now what we are engaging with. We are working on strengthening our ability to monitor. We are continuing the political process, and we are supporting Ukraine in the next steps, elections being a key area. I would perhaps leave it at this and continue in discussion with you, also hear your views and your take, or try to answer your question.
Thank you very much indeed, Ambassador. That was really a marvelous overview. Could I ask you maybe to have a seat here, I think, for the purposes of our filming. Let me just go over some ground rules here. Everything that you will say is on the record. There are representatives of the media here. Could you please keep your comment short and concise? And please, before you ask your question, identify who you are so that we know your institutional affiliation. While you're asking about your questions, let me take the opportunity for the first one. What really strikes me about just this remarkable overview that you gave, and we certainly appreciate also your historical references and your personal reflections. So much of the academic debate on the OSCE has been not just about its relevance, but what kind of organization is this? On the one hand, they do election monitoring, they do minority rights, then they have some hard security, they do media, economic development. It's very difficult to explain to someone like this who would come from Mars, this is an international organization here, its mandate. And yet it strikes me, listening to you, this is exactly the strength of the organization, potentially in a multidimensional crisis like you've seen. And I was wondering, you've touched on these elements, but in terms of understanding now the organization's missions and strengths and flexibility, how do you view these various baskets and what they have to bring to bear on the situation?
Actually, under the Ukrainian chairmanship, we started a debate on defining security challenges, and little did the Ukrainians know they would have become one themselves, or would have been victim of one themselves. And this discussion was a very difficult one.
Yeah.
One of the things we saw immediately is that this broad approach of security the OSCE has is a good one. In fact, you know, security challenge, climate change, water issues are future security challenges. We need to prepare ourselves to deal with them. And because they will have an impact on security. We see already water impacting on relations between countries. If you manage it properly, it builds those relations. But if you don't, it creates tensions. And so conflict prevention, which is what we do, really requires attention for this kind of. And this is only one of many examples. Stable societies assure stability broadly. So attention to democratic processes in a way in countries. Obviously, also this is very controversial. It's controversial and divisive inside the organization. What we do is strengthening democratic institutions, strengthening rule of law. We try to respect and to acknowledge the fact that cultures are different, models are different. We can't export the same model everywhere. We have to accept that some things that are done in certain places have to be interpreted in a very different way in others. We have to accept that there are countries that are very recent and that they don't have centuries of, how can I say, slow development and also cultural adaptation to the changes in the structures. And therefore, we can't expect that overnight a country that has you know, a lack in terms of democracy, democratic standards, can solve it so fast. But we look at the direction in which these things go. And so stable countries contribute to stability of the region. So those are the notions. But then the OSCE traditionally has always been inward-looking. It was an East-West organization, relations within the organization. What we have discovered over the last 15 years is that even security now is global. Okay? It cannot be looked only in regional. Just look at the issue of foreign fighters. Yeah. And so security starts within your societies. You have to understand what is happening in your societies, first of all. And then you export, even a stable society, like take the UK, and suddenly they discover that they are exporting terrorists. So dealing with issues, security issues, only in a regional context is not good enough. So we start looking at horizontal areas of engagement, looking at terrorism being one, trafficking. Trafficking in all of its, you know, from non-proliferation, trafficking of small arms, to organized crime and combating organized crime, becomes very closely related to security. The problem in all this, and the problem we face, is that this expands hugely the agenda of the organization. And the risk is that we become very superficial. Yes. And then we deal only with, you know, here and there, and this is the difficulty we find in an organization based on consensus, where then you find different countries that tell you that the priority should be whatever they think it is, and they're all different. Yeah. And then it's difficult to prioritize in this condition. So this is where we were when Ukraine started, and then we all now focused on the same issues, because obviously now we are going back to the fundamentals, and there is a debate about the key rules of the game. Are they still valid? And of course, the way this is expressed, and again, I'm speaking as trying to reflect the position of the whole spectrum of the ideas in the OSCE. There are some who say the key rules are very clear and we need to make sure that everybody sticks to those rules. And others who say, well, those key rules are old rules. And if you look at situations like Kosovo or situations like Crimea, these rules don't really apply anymore. And there you have a very fundamental difference. And how do you overcome that? That's a challenge for us.
That's very interesting indeed. Let's take a question, please.
Thank you. Dear Mr. Zannier, thank you for an interesting presentation. My name is Maria Snegovaya. I'm a journalist and a PhD student here in Columbia. So my question is really very simple. Has Russia invaded Ukraine?
You only get one question, so if that's it,
that's
Masha.
it.
Okay. An easy one to start.
Yes. Yes. Okay.
Should we take three and come back to it?
Yeah, I was going
okay.
to ask.
Okay.
Okay.
Oh,
All right.
yeah. Thank you, Mr. Ambassador, for this presentation. Do you think that...
Tell us who you are, for the record.
Bob Harris, Columbia alum. Do you think that the West will eventually provide Russia with a solid assurance that Ukraine will not become a member of NATO? Now, if so...
Sorry, say again. Who provides assurance?
Yeah, I mean, will the West provide assurance, to Russia that Ukraine will? Yeah,
that Ukraine won't become a member.
I'm talking about the relationship between the West and Ukraine.
Okay.
Thank
now,
you.
if so, how would this process develop from the present conflict? Now, I know Ukraine, wouldn't be interested in this, but could you just address the West and Ukraine on this issue?
Okay.
Thank you. And let's maybe take one more to round them out. Take this, and I'll take you first next time. Yeah, thank you.
Good evening. My name is Janos Stelker. I'm a political journalist, and I'm affiliated with the Department of Journalism here at Columbia. I have a question. It seems that the conflict that you were describing has dominated the news, the conflict along the border, but it seems that, like, during the last couple of weeks, there's a new issue that arises also in an international context, and that's Ukraine's problem with corruption within the country. Mm-hmm. So I'm interested, what do you think, like, how important is this notion in the question about where Ukraine is heading, whether east or west?
Okay, perfect. So that's a lot to sink our teeth in. So I'll let you take the first round, and then we can go back. Yeah.
The first question is all about terminology. What is an invasion for you? What we see is a conflict that is very atypical. In fact, this is something that we're starting to discuss. I was at another panel a couple of days ago with the US general, a general of the Marine Corps, who was saying we need to understand who our enemy is, to understand where it started, and then we can adjust the thing. In something like what we see in eastern Ukraine, I ask you the question, who is the enemy? And if there is a conflict, so the Ukrainians say there is an enemy, who is the enemy there? And is it Russia? Why? How do you see that it is Russia? We have seen a number of things. We have seen these people dressed up with unmarked military uniforms. We had the impression that they are not all local. They come from other places. Other places in Russia, but even other places in other places. Mm-hmm. They shoot on the Ukrainians. They have heavy weapons. Initially, they said they picked them up in local military depots. But they seem to be getting new weapons as the Ukrainians destroy them. There are new ones coming, and even better ones coming. So there is a problem, and this is one of the reasons we feel we need to monitor the borders properly, because there is a feeling that there is a constant flow of pretty heavy and efficient weapons coming into eastern Ukraine. These weapons don't seem to have particular markings, or it's not a weapon that you see with a Russian flag on it and you say, aha, Russia has invaded Ukraine, there's a tank with a Russian flag on it that is marching down. There are strange markings and Donbass written on the side and this kind of thing, and people who drive them who are not dressed as Russian servicemen dressed. At least this is what we see, and of course we only see a very tiny bit for the reason I said earlier, we have limited access. So what I see is that this movement of separatists is extremely well equipped. they managed to destroy, as we heard from President Poroshenko the other day, 60% of the Ukrainian army. So they're pretty powerful and pretty capable. They wear masks, so we can't really tell who they are. So the question is Russia invading Ukraine? In Crimea, it's a different story. In Crimea, Russia, more than invading, I would say it has annexed a part of Ukraine. There, I think the question is straightforward. There is a decision even on that, and in eastern Ukraine, it's much less clear what is happening, even though there are suspicions, there are hints and impressions. But that's where we are. Now, we have other players. We have NATO, for instance, that have satellite access, and NATO is making very clear statements. I'm not NATO, so I can only mention that there are statements from NATO. NATO says they've seen Russian military units going in. We haven't, but we haven't also because we don't have access. So I wasn't there. They were shooting. They have big weapons. I only have civilians. I can't ask them to go in and ask those guys where they come from. And so I really can't say whether there was an invasion from elements of the Russian army, because I simply don't know it.
Yeah. And perhaps the question on
NATO
in the West, and then the corruption question.
NATO in the West. We have a principle in the OSCE. It is called the Hamlet formula. It goes back to the origins. And in fact, it was developed in that context where we had NATO and the Warsaw Pact. And basically what that principle says is that every country has the right to be or not to be party of a military alliance or a group of states. So at that time, the countries of the Warsaw Pact had the right to be parties to the Warsaw Pact, and the parties of NATO had the right to be parties of NATO. This was conceived in a way, in a Cold War mood, to kind of freeze the situation. Obviously, after the end of the Cold War, the principle remained, but it was used in a way by NATO to expand. Because a number of countries decided they had the right to choose where to belong, and they decided to belong to NATO, and so NATO expanded. And the issue arrives now at Ukraine. Now, one of the issues around Ukraine is that Russia says, if Ukraine becomes part of NATO, my security is in danger. This is what we hear from the Russians. The Ukrainians can argue it is our right to decide where we belong and where we want to be. So this is, in a way, the state of affairs at this point. My view, and I can't speak on behalf of NATO or on behalf of the West, obviously. So I can only try to describe things as I see them. Giving a guarantee to Russia that Ukraine will not become part of NATO is in a way determining from outside the future security of Ukraine. So can anybody do that? I think it's up to the Ukrainians. It's for the Ukrainians to determine this. Now, the Ukrainians have a problem, though, because the Ukrainians have divisions also within the country. Even though we have seen that there have been influences, etc., but in Ukraine, I visited a little bit around myself. I've been in Kharkiv, I've been in various places, and I see that there are Russian communities that look at the movement of Ukraine westwards with certain suspicion and with certain concern. So European Union is more looking at economic factors, economic development, and perhaps there is a traction on that wouldn't be too offensive because of the economic things, also for communities of Russian speaking communities in Ukraine, etc. We know that this is really the agenda of Western Ukraine primarily. But NATO would or might become very divisive. When we had the first kidnapping of our own military monitors on invitation of Ukraine, they were mainly from NATO countries. And they were not a NATO group. There were also Moldovans and some others. but there were no Russians there. And so they were perceived as a Western military group monitoring the East. And they got caught because of that. And that gave us a problem also for the monitoring mission. In the monitoring mission, I had Russians, and I still have Russians now, as part of my international operation. Russians, they do an excellent job. One of the Russian monitors explained to me also his interpretation on who were the rebels he was talking, the separatists he was talking to, and he was telling me some of them were not local. And so it was, fair enough in his characterization of the thing. It was a good value for us. But we need to be impartial to be credible. But when we saw a group that had a kind of a NATO flavor, we saw that the reaction of the people there was problematic. So this is a question that the Ukrainians themselves should answer. And I don't think we have a right, in a way, to try to answer it for them. Because it is a difficult potentially internal debate that they have. And if they come to a conclusion, they may ask the international community, please take this or don't take this, or this is, or we need a transitional phase or whatever. But that's the way I see it. But giving Russia straightforward guarantee, this I wonder who has the right of doing that.
Okay, and the corruption question.
The corruption is not an issue of the last few months. Corruption is an issue we've been discussing with the Ukrainians throughout the time we've been working with them. We would like to do much more. It's unfortunate, if you look at the former Soviet space, it's something, and beyond, of course, it's, I don't want really to single out, why should I single out only that space? But we see patterns that are worrying. There is a need to improve economic governance. There are initiatives. We're discussing with the Ukrainians now. Also, we have an economic coordinator that does work on that, on good governance. We work with anti-corruption agencies. There is a big debate in Kiev on the anti-corruption agency there, and it's a sensitive issue internally. But certainly, this is an issue the Ukrainians need to come to terms with, because people are fed up living in a corrupt system. And this is what also has damaged Ukraine, the lack of reforms and all that, is very much also related at this very bad model of economic governance, where you've seen people, a few becoming extremely rich, and the large majority of the population really not, their living conditions not really improved.
Very good. Okay, let's take a few more. Ma'am, can you please go to the mic? Thank you.
Elena Lipkova of Medley Global Advisors. Thank you very much for this presentation. I have two questions. You mentioned that the mandate of border monitoring will be renewed or is up for renewal, but it may be difficult to do so. Why do you say that? And also, how do you think that the Crimea issue can be resolved in a more long-term way, given that Russia's position and Ukraine's position and Western's position is completely not finding an agreement? So how do you find this reaching a point of agreement?
Super, thank you.
Can
please. Yeah, take another couple. Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
Hi, I'm Max de Haldevang. I'm a graduate student here at the Harriman Institute. I was just wondering, you touched on it briefly, but whether you could expand more on, we've seen President Poroshenko today outline sort of firm plans to apply to join the EU by 2020. I was wondering if you could talk about how you think that might affect the security balance here, and whether, I know you're not an EU official, but you are a diplomat of an EU country, whether you could say whether you think there's much appetite for that within the EU, what the chances are of that. Thanks very much.
Yeah, great. Maybe one more for this round.
Hi, thank you for coming and talk to us. My name is Jean from Columbia CIPA here.
School of International Public Affairs.
My question is about the optimal peace scenario. So in your opinion, the separatists and the Ukrainian government should pursue a two-state solution or a one-state solution?
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much indeed. A lot of interesting, important questions.
Border. There are two sides, as in all borders. There are two sides to the border. On the Ukrainian side, at this moment, we have no access for security reasons. Basically, our monitors in the Lugansk and Donetsk districts do need to require security guarantees, do need to get security guarantees from local commanders to move around. And we still haven't managed to send them down to the border because basically, obviously the ceasefire is recent and we'll have to see how things develop, and we are repositioning ourselves in those regions. But the marching orders I gave them is that you now start moving around and go down to the border and check also the roads from the border towards the big cities to see what is coming in from that, because I think this is very important. We have all these suspicions that there was material and maybe units coming, military units coming in. We don't know, but we want to be able to monitor what is happening. So on that, we will have to see if we get authorization to be able to at least, I can't say patrol, but to have random checks in the border areas to see what is going on. The other side of the border is where we have this operation I mentioned earlier. So we are at the two border crossing points. The mandate for that operation expires at the end of this month. Being confined in those two border points, the reports that we have from the monitors is that nothing significant has gone through. Now, Russia has used our reports to say the OSCE confirms that nothing went through the border. And whereas we said that nothing went through those two crossing points on a border that is 300 odd kilometers long. So this is now being, in a way, distorted and is backfiring, in my perspective. So I'm personally also of the opinion that if that mandate is renewed, it should also evolve. And it should include the possibility for us also to have this kind of random patrols to have a better sense of what's going on along the border in general. And being stuck in two border crossing points doesn't make much sense. That's a very personal opinion. But I know that a number of countries in the OSCE feel the same. And the Russians don't. The Russians say, this is what we agreed. This is what we agreed at a meeting at the ministerial level in Berlin. In fact, the Russians had offered 3 border crossing points, and for operational reasons at the time, we decided to deploy only 2. And they said, this is what we agreed. We stick to that agreement, but not one thing more than that. So this may turn into a difficult discussion, may stall the decision on the prolongation, and we may, there is a risk that we lose it. Or maybe we will prolong it. That's really an issue that will have to be decided by the participating states. I don't personally have a role in that. Crimea, I think the plan of the Ukrainians is to bring it to the ICJ, so to have the International Court of Justice pronounce itself on what happened there. So looking at the issue of international legality of what happened and having a decision of the court. That is, it seems to me, the direction in which they want to move, and we'll see what if they then move in the direction what the outcome of that is. The EU by 2020. That is really, as I was saying earlier, there was a plan by Ukraine to move much faster towards the EU. Now they are looking at a more relaxed schedule. Even though accession negotiations last very long, I doubt if they start today, they might make it for 2020. But for them to be a member in 2020, I wish them good luck. We will have to see, because first of all, it takes 2 to tango, as they say. So how are the Europeans going to react? We know that the new president of the Commission is very conservative in terms of further expansion of the EU. He wants to look at some of the internal problems within the EU first, and then look at the issue of further expansion. So there is also an issue of EU policy. But to me, the key issue there is the relations between the EU and Russia. Because in a way, Ukraine suffered from the bad state of relations between the lack of dialogue and the kind of a competitive approach, if you want, of the Russian-centric Eurasian, if you want, setup of organization and the European Union itself. And it found itself on the dividing line. So Ukraine between East and West, it's literally also in a difficult place to be in broader geostrategic terms, and suffered from this. So I think the way forward should be a strategic deal between the European Union and Russia. That should be a deal on all big issues, trade, energy, the economy will be at the forefront of all this, obviously. And then Ukraine might find its own collocation in there. And NATO is a bit more complicated, but on the EU, that should be the. Are we on course for that? Now we are at a time when we have sanctions, and so we are very far from that kind of situation. And Ukraine is caught in this very controversial, very complicated relationship. So in fact, these announcements do little to kind of improve the larger picture. I don't want to assign blame right or left, but we have Russia that has now a very robust policy vis-à-vis its own robust. It's perhaps also how can I say, a diplomatic term at this point, vis-à-vis its own neighborhood, and this is contributing to this. But also the European Union has an increasingly, how can I say, active neighborhood policy itself. So there is this competition that has to turn into something that is more cooperative for the countries in between to feel more comfortable. The long-term solution in Ukraine, my view, I'm one of those who think, being the Secretary General of the OSCE, I have to stand behind OSCE principles. So territorial integrity of the Ukraine is, for me, a key principle. So within that, there are many models. I was among those who, in the beginning, back in January, I gave interviews to some media, and I was talking about federalism in Ukraine. There were some who were saying never federalism in Ukraine. I was saying, well, after all, why not? I mean, Germany is a federal country, and US, Russia, Austria, where the OSCE is based. There are so many federal countries. So it depends what we're talking about. If one looks at the federation, the model of Bosnia-Herzegovina, where you have Republika Srpska, then it becomes more complicated. But if we look at one of the standard Western democracy federal model, maybe there is something there that could be looked at for Ukraine. The problem is that I stopped saying this when the Russians and the pro-Russian community started arguing that that's what was needed for Ukraine, and this became so unpopular in Kiev, because then it became really a synonym of the Bosnian model, or was seen very much as something driving in that direction. Now, the chance that the Ukrainians have at this moment is to use the constitutional reform to engage with and it's not only with the people in the East, but also with the communities across Ukraine, to discuss the future setup of the country. And in the East, perhaps they could have some additional elements of autonomy. So, local governance models can be discussed. I think it's important that a process of dialogue on these things take place. However, we don't know whether this is what we're going to see, and whether the leaders in these regions are willing to sit down at the table and discuss with Kiev. Something we have seen in these months, it's really dynamic between the East and Kiev, that was a very complicated one. People in the East were saying Kiev is doing this as if Kiev were a different planet. And the lack of communications, the party of the regions that was in a way the conduit of the vehicle of this process and of this dialogue dissolved, and nothing replaced it. So the East suddenly didn't have a representation in Kiev, in the parliament, etc. And that was an element that created additional distance between the periphery and the center.
Yeah, very interesting. Okay, we have time for one more round of questions, so please keep your questions brief. Okay.
Yeah, I had a question about the federalism. And so I appreciate you talking about that, but I wanted to
Could you please tell us who you are?
Yeah, I'm sorry. It's Rhonda Haubin, and I'm a journalist, and I also take some courses at Columbia. But I thought the federalism, I thought Angela Merkel had promised Putin that some European leaders would sit down. This is before the coup happened, and they would talk about federalism for the Ukraine and what was possible. And so I wondered if you've seen on her willing to look into that. Switzerland has is a federal situation. I'm sure there's lots of different examples. So do you see any more of Europe talking about that or be willing to at this point?
Okay.
And
we have to limit it to one question, I'm afraid, because we have 3 other people who want to ask one. Thank you. Just give the mic, thanks.
Hi, my name is Amanda Bellows. I'm a doctoral student in history at UNC Chapel Hill. My question is, what if any, do you think America's role should be in resolving this conflict?
So, say again?
What?
America's role.
What do you think America's role should be in resolving
Oh, should be.
conflict?
Okay.
Yeah, what's America's role? Yep. Casey?
My name is Casey Michel. I am a student at the Harriman Institute as well. You mentioned earlier the current situation that the Crimean Tatars are facing. I was wondering if you might be able to discuss the current mechanisms available to the OSCE in terms of monitoring the situation, and if there's any likelihood of enhancing that moderation moving forward.
Yeah, thank you. And final question.
I'm Yulia Marchinsky from Moldova. I represent the Human Rights Information Center. I'm here on a fellowship Human Rights Advocates program thanks to Harriman Institute. My question is, on the 30th of November in Moldova there are elections. There is such a threat vehiculated in the media that separatist movement might move from eastern Ukraine towards Kherson, Mariupol, Nikolaev, Odessa, and Transnistria, which is a separatist region in Moldova. Also, Gagauz region in Moldova also manifests separatist tendencies. Yes, is that threat real or is it just a rumor? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So, again, lots of big issue questions. Federal models, role of the U.S., Tatars and mechanisms for monitoring in the Moldova situation.
On federalism, there isn't really much I can add to what I said earlier. There have been proposals for that, but it has become highly politicized. I attended at some point a conference in Kiev where a parliamentarian from the East was saying, let's discuss about federalism. And everybody got up and started shouting at him. I was myself taken aback at the reaction, but the word federalism now is a problem in itself. So there is, decentralization is perhaps one way of looking at something that would be very close to a federal solution, but in different terms. There are other ways. The international community is helping. There is the Venice Commission of the Council of Europe that is working with the Parliament, with the Rada in Kiev. And they're following and they're assisting. They have expertise in all these things, but the problem is the politics in it, and the use of the word federalism in this moment is just a non-starter in Ukraine. Whoever proposes it disqualifies itself. That's my impression on that. The U.S. role is extremely important. U.S. is supporting the government. First of all, Ukraine needs help, needs all the help it can get at this moment. The U.S. are supporting and should continue, in my view, to support Ukraine. Also, the financial economic side of this. The dialogue and the political support is also important. Obviously, now this comes in a situation where there is a strong polarization in the international community. So the United States are among the best friends of Ukraine in the context of a very difficult debate and a very difficult dialogue with Russia. So this, as I say, it's a way of supporting Ukraine, but in a context that is extremely divisive. The US can play also a strong role in supporting, and they do play a strong role in supporting initiatives like those of the OSCE. I have quite a number of excellent Americans serving in the various OSCE operations. We just hired an American as the head of the OSCE office in Kiev. We have an office there that runs a number of projects, including the dialogue, etc. And it will be very much a centerpiece of this operation. So there is a need, and I raised the issue also of an even stronger contribution of monitors from the US, which would be welcome for the deployment on the ground. So it seems to me the best direction in this is a support to a process of de-escalation. That's the best chance we have. But at the same time also, how can I say, assisting Ukraine in a phase of also of transition that is very difficult, and where strong encouragement, strong support from outside, including encouragement for reforms, is needed. The Tatars. We have the High Commission on National Minorities. The High Commission on National Minorities has engaged with the Tatar communities now for 20 years. So we know them very well, we have contacts, we know the leaders. This High Commissioner is an independent institution based in The Hague. And the previous one, Vollebæk, who was former foreign minister of Norway, had prepared a report on this that was discussing with the Ukrainians. We're preparing a conference where this report will be presented with a number of recommendations also for initiatives from the Ukrainian government to improve further the condition of the Tatar minority there. Then Crimea happened, and now we lost the connections. Some Tatars have been expelled, some decided also to move out. They do feel discriminated, at least this is what they tell us, but we lost the direct contact with the ones that are in Crimea. We hear that there are restrictions, there are being clamping down on the mosques and whatever, so that there is concern. In this moment, our High Commissioner is negotiating also with the Russians, discussing with the Ukrainians a possibility for her to go to Crimea and talk to them. The first thing we need to do is to understand what is going on, what are the developments, what initiatives need to be taken, and then we will talk to whoever can make a difference. So on that we will have to be very pragmatic. If we need to talk to the Russians, we'll talk to the Russians. But of course we are not indifferent to the conditions of the Tatar community there. We want to protect them, and we will try to make all the steps that we have to do that. Gagauzia and Transnistria, this is introducing a new angle to the whole thing. I'm aware of the elections. I'm aware also of the debate in the country, because Moldova now made an important step forward by signing the association agreement with the EU, and so it has taken a EU path. But there are forces, political forces in Moldova that are also very significant, that do oppose that course. And they believe that relations with Russia, relations with the customs union should not be dropped. So those elections that are coming up will be important in terms also of the future course of Moldova. What we hear, but that's very preliminary, that it looks like the European course will be confirmed, but as I say, elections are there, and we need to go through the hurdle. Beyond that, there are two specific issues. The most recent one is Gagauzia. On Gagauzia, the government and the parliament has started a dialogue with the leadership there to try to assuage and to try to address the concerns. But Gagauzia is a region in the middle of Moldova, so it's kind of enclave. It's not an enclave because it's fully part of Moldova, but it's an area of where you have Russian speakers and where these Russian speakers have a very pro-Russian orientation. And they're dissatisfied with some of the strategic choices of the government. And at some point they threatened secession if Moldova went. So these are the difficult bits and pieces that you find in dealing with this post-Soviet environment. It's so composite and so complicated. The other thing is Transnistria. Transnistria, we have a political process going on for a long time. There is a negotiation, and format of negotiation is called 5+2. The OSCE is a bit the facilitator of this. It includes a number of external players, including Ukraine, including Russia, including the United States, and the European Union. And this process now has slowed down dramatically. We had a meeting in July where not much was done. There was a meeting recently was scheduled and it was cancelled completely. We have difficulty engaging in with the Russians. I'll talk about this. And this is casting doubts. What's going on is something happening there? This looks very much a kind of a wait-and-see situation, also on the side of the Transnistrians. They're probably looking at what is happening in Ukraine. They're looking at what is happening in Moldova, the elections, etc. In fact, this situation is very complicated because there are many factors in play. One of them is the arrangements with the EU do benefit also these areas. There is freedom of movement for the Moldovans, but for those who have Moldovan passports in the European Union. So Transnistrians who have Moldovan passports. And the free trade area for Transnistria companies, there are quite a few of them that are registered in Moldova, they do get the preferential treatment with the European Union like the other Moldovan companies. So there is an interest, an economic interest for them in remaining attached also to this. So there is a balance of considerations there. We'll have to see over time how that plays and whether this has, if we see suddenly separatists with green things appearing in Transnistria, we'll be once again taken by surprise. We haven't seen any, beyond the rumors that you can hear everywhere in the Russian, in the former Soviet space. We've been looking at the patterns of deployment of Russian forces in Transnistria. There is a group of Russian peacekeepers. They have a military depot. That has not changed. But how do you prevent private fighters or whatever from appearing wherever, whether this is Transnistria, whether this is anywhere? What can we do to do it? If anybody has a recommendation, I would like to hear it.
Well, I have to say that was truly a lot of angles that you covered, that you offered us. That was really fantastic. And for an organization that's involved in so many different complex issues across so many different parts of the region and the world, truly has a Secretary General who is covering an extraordinary amount of territory like you did here with us. So we're truly grateful to you for your insights. We hope you will visit us again, and we wish you the best of luck with all of these important processes that you've commented on tonight. Thank you very much.
Yeah.